Only partly, I only love my bed and my mom, I'm sorry. 50 dub, I even got it tatted on.
Welcome everyone to CDO's magazine series of one-on-one interviews with CDOs, data leaders, and key influencers. I'm your host, Robert Lutton, Vice President, Sandhill Consultants, and I'm coming to you today from Toronto, Canada, working with the CDO magazine. Today, I have the pleasure of introducing another Canadian who's actually living in Atlanta, Tracy Daniels. Tracy is the CDO of Truist. Welcome, Tracy.
Thank you. So wonderful to talk to another T-Dot.
Well, yeah, as we say, it's the six. We're in the six. You know, for those people that know some of our artists there, you know, we belong in the six now. So Tracy, it's rare that I get to interview someone who actually knows Toronto, knows Canada. So it is a pleasure. Now, I did a little bit of background, and I've noticed that pretty much most of your career you've been in financial services. So can I ask, what attracted you to this area?
Yeah, it was never my intention to stay in financial services, but what was really attractive was the scale of the business and the problems and the touch with clients that this business really exudes, right? It's interesting having grown up in Canada and having experienced that financial system many moons ago, 20 years ago. I was kind of struck sometimes by the difference of, call it the immediacy of what I saw, you know, working with my Canadian bank versus differences when I started banking in the US. So when the opportunity arose to have an experience with an American bank, I jumped at it and then fell in love with it, quite frankly.
For our listeners that are mostly in the US and around the world, Canada has maybe 5-6 major banks. So we're kind of stuck in the way that the banks work. Whereas in the US, there's a multitude of different banks. And obviously that brings in different practices, which Tracy, I believe you've gotten into and got the love on that. Just a follow up on that, because I noticed that you've had such an impressive career. You've started from the project manager position to now the CDO of Truist. So it would be helpful for our listeners, knowing that we talked about the financial arena and the big banks, to know a little bit more about Truist and how it came into being, because I understand there's an interesting story there.
Yeah, absolutely. So I actually started in infrastructure, believe it or not. So I came fresh out of school from Western University and thought I knew everything and had lots of great ideas about how things could be done differently, and felt really fortunate to have people in my career then and even now who gave me a lot of room to exercise those thoughts, disprove hypotheses and things that I had. And so it was an interesting career from, call it infrastructure, to project and program management, to change management, to data, to back to infrastructure, app dev. So yeah, I always say I've done pretty much every job that there is to be done in IT. Truist has been really a phenomenal opportunity and a story. So I left one financial service to join a smaller regional bank in Atlanta at the time. And I was doing automation and this thing called data. And then this opportunity came for BB&T and SunTrust to merge and create really the 6th largest bank in the US. And then I had to declare my major. And that's when the opportunity came to really become the CDO for Truist.
A phenomenal success story, if I might add. And actually, I do believe that, you know, the whole ethos that you bring to your team is that you have a desire and you inspire your teams to exceed expectations. So, you know, we'll obviously be discussing about how that comes into being during our interview. So it is a pleasure to begin with that. So with that, now, obviously, during the last couple of years, the evolution of the role of the CDO has gone through some interesting growth spurts. Some may say, may you live in interesting times. And of course, the CDO certainly is living in interesting times. The CDO may have initially started out on defensive strategies and then gone into some kind of defensive and offensive strategies. we'd really like to hear from you on your opinion on the evolution that your role has gone through these past couple of years.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I'll talk a little bit, I think, in general, and then I'll talk
Sure.
specifically even at Truist, which I think sort of mirrors what I see in the industry. Absolutely. Particularly in financial services, the role is very well steeped in defense, right? Making sure that from a regulatory perspective, you're paying attention to the appropriate, law, rules, and regs. That you're thinking through the compliance of the data. And then as we've moved forward in these last few years, right, the privacy elements of data from an individual perspective. And so I've sort of followed the same playbook here at Truist, right, which is as we came together as two banks to create Truist, it was making sure that the defense was truly laid down appropriately. So we started with governance, right? We started with this idea that we would harmonize the governance structures between the two banks. We would make Truist decisions about what we were going to do going forward. And then from there, we would build. And so we started with this idea that we really wanted all of our lines of businesses to partner in this journey. It wasn't a Tracy, a CDO activity. It was really an accountability of our lines of business. So when we laid down governance, it was with the tenet that there would be representation from each of our lines and accountability for how we actually put governance into practice. So we started with defense, but we also very openly said it would also start with lines of business. So it was kind of a little bit of a carrot and a stick. I wasn't just going to beat people over the head with governance, but I was going to pay attention to the business needs and the business capabilities that we needed to support. And so when we built with those two things in mind. And there was a gentleman who I saw speak one day, and he talked about, back in the day, you used to make cars and then you remembered to sort of bolt on some of the security elements.
Right.
And it became, more elegant cars, more inexpensive builds, more safe builds when you built that all in together. And that was sort of the thought that was in my head as we were beginning to lay down what governance and data strategy looked like for Truist.
And I think it was Volvo was one of the first organizations to introduce the seatbelt, which, of course, a lot of people back in the early days, I'm sure you remember, Tracy, that you'd fit 6, 7, 8 people in the car and it goes, safety belt? What is that, right? So definitely, yes, the cars have matured their style, and so has the role of the CDO. In your particular case, what has your role gone through of these past couple of years? Because obviously we've gone through tumultuous couple of years with the pandemic, and every location has been hit, and every job has been hit, and we've had to pivot to support things. So can you give us any kind of experience of what the evolution of your role has gone through over the past couple of years as well?
Yeah, it's become more, right? I think you see in the industry, there are more CDOs being named in many more industries. I think the remit continues to get refined. So when I talk to my peers in the industry, there's a lot of variation between what we do. Some do governance, some do, analytics, some do the engineering. My role, we've actually been fairly consistent, again, because I think we started with this idea of what is it we do and what are we trying to accomplish on behalf of the business. And so when I talk about my role, I always say I've got 3 functions, right? I have the governance function or a control function, and that is true data governance, but it's also architectural tenets and principles in terms of how we do the work, because to some degree, the work is federated within the environment, right? My peers who are CIOs for certain businesses do data work, both in their application and sometimes with assets that their lines of business need specifically. The analytics community for Truist actually sits in the line of business, or very close to the actual customer, right, with the work that they're doing. And so we want to make sure that from a control perspective, we're laying down the appropriate guardrails so people can play in that space really safely. So my role has always been about control, but it's also about delivery. So we have teams that run and support a variety of platforms that we use for data, be it structured and unstructured data. We own the platform for BI and visualization. And we're building out expertise for AI and ML for sort of the next set of things that we're going to be doing across data. So our job is to not just conceptualize how things happen, but actually deliver on behalf of our teammates. And that's changing, to your point, because I think in the past we could think about capabilities and we would build it and it's super cool, it's fantastic. Now it is much more tightly coupled with what is the product and service or IT product we're trying to produce, or an analytic product that we're trying to produce. And so we've had to learn to get faster and more nimble and think with the end in mind, which includes things like what is the user experience, not just can they technically code something. And the last bit is culture. And I think this is another area where CDO roles are changing. It's not just about educating people about what data is and is not, and what their fiduciary responsibility is, but there's an influence role and factor around bringing together ideas that are permeating in the company so that we can really distill what is the underlying set of capabilities and the nugget and maybe even the collaboration that can happen in the end product. And so I think our role as influencers, and not the TikTok kind, but influencers in the environment has also grown.
Well, Tracy, we'd really like to thank you for your time today. I'd be really interested in seeing some of your vacation plans and see how you plan that out. We really appreciate it. I hope that we get a chance to come back and check on what's happening with you and in the future.
Absolutely. It's been a pleasure.
Well, for our listeners, please visit cdomagazine.tech for additional interviews. Thank you.